Spain is preparing to offer legal status to up to 500,000 undocumented migrants. Pedro Sanchez's government stance is at odds with the hardening of attitudes in many other European countries towards immigration. So, can Spain's bold move really work? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Spain has a booming economy, but it also has an ageing population, a skills shortage, and the lowest fertility rate in Europe. Pedro Sanchez hopes to fix this and increase the state's tax take by giving undocumented migrants the right to work and live in Spain. But the leader of the far-right Vox party says the policy proves that Sanchez hates the Spanish people.
Eager to be made legal, undocumented migrants in Spain celebrate as they rush to the consulate following the government's announcement to legalise their status.
Many people are coming. There are many people in high demand. The consulate is full. There are people overflowing.
While many European nations are tightening their borders, Spain's socialist-led coalition government is moving in the opposite direction. It argues that migrants are integral to Spain's economic growth, given the country's ageing population, growing labour shortages, particularly in farming, tourism and care work. Spain's economy grew by 2.8% in 2025, outperforming other major European economies.
Yes, my country has offered a path to regulate 500,000 undocumented migrants. 500,000 people we live with every day, at the market, on the bus, at our children's school, people who care for our parents, work in the fields, who have built hand in hand with us the progress of our country. People who were already here, already part of our lives.
The new legislation, beginning in April, will be open to people who can prove they've lived in Spain for at least 5 months and who have no criminal record. Successful applicants will receive a 1-year residency permit, which can be extended. Spain has seen a large influx of migrants in recent years, with a majority from Colombia, Peru and Honduras. The opposition far-right Vox party argues the Spanish Prime Minister's plan will encourage further irregular migration and put pressure on public services.
Because his own people hate him and he decided that the people must be replaced, the average Spanish man must now leave, and instead people will be brought from other places, and these new people will be regularised at full speed.
Pedro Sanchez has championed pro-migrant stances throughout his premiership and survived multiple early elections since 2018. But with right-wing parties gaining in popularity and his coalition under pressure, will this move strengthen or weaken his position?
Well, let's bring in our guests. I'm delighted to say, joining us from Brussels, we have Letizia van der Venne. She is a senior advocacy officer that's at the Platform for Undocumented Migrants. Also in Brussels is Javier Carbonell. He is policy analyst at the European Politics and Institutions Programme. And from London, we have Pablo Calderon Martinez. He is associate professor in politics and international relations at Northeastern University. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Pablo, I'll come to you first of all. Just spell out for me why you think Spain's Prime Minister is wanting to do this.
To be honest, I think it came as a little bit of a surprise. There's been an initiative in Spain for quite some time, and this is not the first time we have this sort of process of regularization of undocumented migrants, but it certainly caught me a little bit by surprise, and I think it's part of a wider drive from the socialist government. And we've seen Pedro Sanchez put forward his more social policy and these new policies. We had also the proposed ban on social media, for example, for under 16. So I think it's part of this sort of legislative drive that Pedro Sanchez is going through. It was a fairly uncontroversial policy, I would say, where most sort of center-left parties came together. Obviously, the right was never going to necessarily agree with this, although historically he's been the Partido Popular, the center-right, that's gone through more process of regularization of illegal migrants. But Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what Pedro Sanchez is thinking, but I'm sure he's thinking about, as ever, his political survival. We've spoken here many times how he's the great survivalist of politics in Europe, perhaps. And I think there's a calculation there about trying to wrestle the political debate and try to bring the debate to the stuff and the things that the Socialist Party is really good at, or what they think they're going to be good at, and what they can really sell as accomplishments for the government.
Thanks, Pablo. Leticia, to you, it's quite a bold move by Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain. What's your gut feeling about this?
Well, I think it comes after quite a long battle for regularization by undocumented people themselves and by movements like Regularisation Ya. For years already, they've been asking for this. And they also did a civil law proposal, a citizen law, apologies. And that is clearly one of the reasons why they are doing this. It's not legally speaking the basis of it, but certainly morally and ethically, it's one of the drivers behind this. So I think, is it a shock move? It's certainly a different decision than what we're seeing in other member states. But I am certain that it is not a surprise in the sense that it has come after years and years of thorough advocacy and lobbying by undocumented people themselves, by employers, by the churches as well. So in that sense, no. And we're very glad to see, of course, this happening because it will be a spring plank for change for many people.
Javier, to you, when you look at some of the narrative and the rhetoric around migrants in Europe, you hear and you see headlines like migration is bad, migrants have done bad things. It's all very negative. And yet, here we have a proactive Prime Minister looking at the situation and thinking, I can actually make this work for undocumented migrants, for me, my government, the tax man in my country, and ultimately Spain. I mean, it's quite a refreshing approach in some respects.
Yes, indeed, it's quite different from the rest of the European Union. And I think it also has to do with the fact that there is good economic growth in Spain. And it's actually a demand not only from the regularization platforms, not only from the left, but also from the business associations. Very recently, the leader of the business association in Catalonia said that they needed migrants like they need air or water. So there is also this kind of market-driven element to it, and this element that because there's economic development, in part produced because there's more migrants, there's more people working, there's more people contributing, and there is, an element of the economy that is not, as we call it in Spain, submerged. It's not, dark economy. It's part of the economy that people participate in contributing, paying taxes. So this helps the economic growth, and it's also a result of the economic growth.
Thank you, Javier. Pablo, to you. So how will this work? So from what I've been reading, you get 1 year of residency and a work permit. You need to have no criminal record whatsoever in your time in Spain, and you could become a citizen after 10 years. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much narrows it down, and I think it's a very interesting way of doing it as well, because they've made it relatively easy as well. I mean, they still have to prove that you've been in Spain for a certain period of time, which is never going to be quite as straightforward for undocumented migrants. But it's certainly a lot easier than it's been in the past, where you had to be part of the census in Spain, and you had to be registered with certain government organizations in Spain, with the council, for example, the town authorities, whatever city you were living in, and then that made it very, very hard, because to be registered with the city as part of the census, you have to have a residence, you have to have a permanent residence, you have to have proof of residence, which usually means some sort of utility bill, stuff like that. So it was very, very hard for people that were irregularly undocumented migrants in the country to have those proofs. So I think it's a very refreshing approach, and it's still going to be difficult for some people, but it's certainly a fairly straightforward way of regularizing and bringing into the lights a huge number of people that, as Javier was mentioning before, have been working in the submerged economy, the shadow economy, for many, many years, and definitely something that is driven by economic demands to some extent. But also, I think there's a lot of political calculation here, and certainly you can see that from the way in which this reform is brought through as a decree, and also with the conditions around the regularization of the migrants, which, as I said before, are going to make it quite easy for people to become part of the regular economy.
Leticia, forgive the simplicity of this question, but what is your textbook definition of an undocumented migrant?
Oh, that's a person who lives in a country where they don't have a residence permit to live there. It's that simple. So that person can be, for example, have migrated themselves. For example, for a partner, relationship breaks down and the person loses the right to reside in that country. And because they don't go back to a country, either because they cannot or because they're not informed, they become undocumented. But it can also be somebody who got refused for asylum, for example. It can also be a child who is born to undocumented parents. So it really simply has to do with whether you have the right papers to live in that country.
And tell me, in all your research and work in this area, is Spain a country that has a higher percentage of undocumented migrants compared to others in Europe?
There's actually quite some good research done recently by a group of academics trying to measure the number of undocumented people in Europe, including in Spain. I would say some countries have a bigger proportion of undocumented population. Spain is one of them, France, Belgium, the core, let's say, European countries, and it has to do with economy, and it also has to do with, of course, history. Interesting thing is that actually the proportion of undocumented people in countries has remained pretty stable throughout the last 15, 20 years. So you don't see a growth of undocumented people per se across Europe.
Thank you. Javier, I want to look at some of the opposition to this. Everyone is chipping in, from Elon Musk, wherever he is in America, to the far-right Spanish party Vox. Their leader used some really kind of damning language. He said that it is proof that the Spanish Prime Minister hates the Spanish people. It's clear not everyone is on board with this.
I mean, of course, this is a dividing issue, and the right wing in Spain is clearly anti-migration, as it is kind of elsewhere in the world, especially in the United States. But this has been really positive for Sanchez, in the sense that one of the big issues in political terms is that the right is growing in Spain, but the left is quite demobilized. And by confronting Pedro Sanchez against, Elon Musk, he has been called a techno oligarch, and has been, calling Sanchez a dirty person and a traitor in very, over the top terms that clearly go over the board. This helps, impose the personal persona of Pedro Sanchez, and helps mobilize kind of the left regarding the left-wing measures that should have been taking place, and over the past years, because there's a deadlock in the Spanish political situation, no policies that were more kind of on the progressive side have been passing. So in that sense, of course, the right-wing politicians have criticized this, and the far right are kind of mimicking the rhetoric of Elon Musk of calling this an invasion, of calling Sanchez a traitor, all which is quite over the top.
Thank you. Pablo, just tell me what your parents are saying, your friends. How has this been welcomed by the Spanish public?
Well, I think in Spain, it really depends of who you're talking to. And as with many other issues, probably every other issue in Spain, there's quite a big division, right, between the left and the right. And that's something that is not new. But I do think, to some extent, and again, because this is a decision driven in part by economic considerations, there is a wider consensus to some extent than in other social issues. There is a broad understanding in Spain, in particular, that the country does need migration, does need migrants, and does need them to maintain this very impressive, fairly impressive rate of economic growth. So I think there is a slightly broader consensus. And of course, the far right and there's other parts that are going to be fairly vocal about this. And also, I think it's quite important for us to pay attention, understand the nature of those irregular migration, because about, depending on who you believe, but about 80% of the people that are we think are going to become regularized are from Latin America. And Latin American migration in Spain is, for obvious reasons, perhaps because of language and cultural ties and history, perhaps a little bit more accepted in some ways than different migration from other parts of the world. So I think this plays a part as well in minimizing this. And again, to a great extent, I think Pedro Sanchez is playing to the gallery as well, right? And is making these changes that are for the left, for its base, and the more Elon Musk and this sort of the more the right wing makes a big deal out of this, the better for Pedro Sanchez, because he's painting himself and he's portraying himself as the alternative to this sort of crazy right wing extreme politics. So all of that is good news for him.
Thanks, Pablo. Letizia, to you, what difference will it make for an undocumented migrant? I'm guessing this will offer people hope, opportunity, and ultimately security in a wonderful country like Spain.
It is. It's in a sense it is a huge opportunity for many thousands of people to get a residence permit and be able and to use that residence permit as a springboard to future stability, because of course this regularization program has relatively, compared to others, relatively attainable conditions to get the first permit, but it is only a 1-year permit. You have to, after 1 year, of course, access other permits, which in the Spanish context are mostly linked to work, not only, but mostly. So the long-term effect of this regularization will only become clear after a couple of years, when we will be able to see how many people can actually retain their permit and not become undocumented again at a later stage.
Javier, I just want to explore something Pablo said there about the different type of migration Spain has experienced. Do you think there is a hierarchy of migrants in Spanish people's eyes, that people from Latin America are made more welcome than perhaps people from Northern Africa?
Completely. I think the attitudes of the right wing and the discourse regarding immigrants from the Middle East and from sub-Saharan Africa is equally bad as is in the rest of the European Union. But I think Latin American immigrants, because they share a religion, because they share this history, because they share the language, are way more accepted and way more integrated. But also there's another important group of migrants we don't normally talk about, but they're very important in Spain, which is migrants from Northern Europe. Spain actually has 4 towns that have more foreign-born people living there than Spanish-born. And there are 4 of them. They're all in the Alicantian coast, in the Costa Blanca. And of course, the people, the migrants that live there are the migrants from Northern Europe, right? Which are rich, older migrants, normally white, and this produces certain problems in terms of the housing prices in these areas, especially this happening also in Barcelona. And we call them expats. We don't normally use the term migrants for them. From Spain, we call them guiris. But there's clearly a hierarchy of migration in Spain that also, because migrants from Northern Europe and Latin America share certain similarities with Spanish people, we accept them more than migrants from North Africa or the Middle East, where I think the attitude is quite kind of bad and in that sense similar to the rest of the European Union.
Javier, you've hit upon something I've often thought about as an Irish person witnessing people who move to Spain. Migrants are only migrants if they're not British people. It's a fascinating use of language that they're described as expats, and they buy up property on your Costa del Sol primarily. How do Spanish people view those kind of migrants from Northern Europe and from the United Kingdom?
So it's very interesting because that this is not part of the public discussion. This is just kind of like a character within Spanish landscape, but it's not an element of public policy. And this is starting to become an issue in big cities like Madrid or Barcelona, where the number of expats is really affecting these areas. And this, we're not longer talking about 4 towns in the coast of Alicante. We're talking about, very big cities where we have very huge problems of housing. But in general, there is a clear element, and this happens in Spain and in the rest of the European Union, where we accept migrants that are rich and white, and we criticize and discriminate against migrants who are, brown or black and poor. And so this is a situation that happens kind of everywhere. It's just in Spain is quite pronounced.
Thank you, Javier. Pablo, to you, this is a bold move by a prime minister ultimately leading a minority government. So how much of a gamble is this for Pedro Sanchez? And, we've spoken before about him on this program, how much of a political gambler he is. He's rolling the dice here.
Yes, he is. And you're right, we've talked about this before. And usually, I have to say, whatever you think of Pedro Sanchez, usually his political gambles tend to pay off. He is a survivalist, as I said before. So only time will tell, right? I think in general, there is a broader consensus about this policy, as I said before. And I think it will work in the long term, but obviously as well, it's very hard for us to prove, or it's going to take a long time for the positive or negative outcomes of this policy to be really filtered down into society. I think the immediate outcome and the immediate response is going to be overwhelmingly positive, mainly as well because of the human stories that emerge from this type of regularization.
Thank you. Letizia, do you think if this is a success for Spain and money starts rolling in terms of tax take and people moving out of the black economy and the shadow work areas where they don't really exist on the taxman's radar, do you think other countries in Western Europe might look at this and think the Spanish are doing something we need to do?
I hope so, in a sense. I think the Spanish program that has been announced is impressive because of the scale of it. But what we often don't see or hear or understand is that a lot of member states in Europe and also outside Europe, a lot of governments actually do these types of regularizations, but they either don't publish it or publicize it very strongly, or it's for smaller groups of people. So Italy, for example, did one in 2020 for people in specific agricultural sectors. Greece has done one 2 years ago that was meant to benefit 30,000 people, so fewer people, but still it was also a conservative government who decided this. Ireland did one 2 years ago. The Netherlands has done one last year for a very small group of people from a specific nationality. So these things are happening throughout the region, but often not to the scale that we are seeing in Spain. And I think it's especially there. That is probably the reason why this one is getting so much attention, and deservedly so, because it will change the lives potentially of 500,000 people.
Thank you. Javier, you mentioned earlier on about the splintering of the left and how fractured it is in Spain. On the other extreme side, if we go to parties like Vox and the right and the far right, do you think this policy will galvanize them to basically attack Sanchez this year?
Certainly, I mean, they didn't need this. It's going to help them because the more the topic of migration is on the agenda, the more their issues, one of their main issues is going to be there, and the more votes they're probably going to receive. We have to remember that at the moment, the far right is increasing their votes, in a quite stark manner. The issue really is about the left, in the sense that will this help mobilize the left? So it's not just that the far right is growing, but at the same time that the left is demobilized. So will this be able to, mobilize these left-wing voters to go to vote, or not at all? But it's certainly going to probably have a bit of a polarizing effect in the short term. In the long term, I agree with Pablo that this will probably be seen as something positive. But in the short term, it's, I think, the case that it will probably help both the far left and the far right. And the question is, by how much, and who's going to benefit more in terms of votes?
And Pablo, in terms of helping one sector of the Spanish economy, tourism is so important for Spain. Do you think tourism leaders will be looking at this policy and thinking this is going to bring more people into our workforces and really give tourism this summer a shot in the arm?
I think yes, but I would say it goes beyond tourism, right? Every single sector in Spain, I think, is in need of a growing workforce. So not only tourism, but also construction, industrial work as well. So there is just a need, because the economy is growing at such a pace. There is a broad need for a wider workforce and the regularization of this workforce, right? And I think the tax revenue, as well as you mentioned before, is also very, very important. But I think this is an economic policy, right? And it's going to have an economic impact that Pedro Sanchez is hoping is going to be positive. And it's hard to see how it's not going to be positive. But I do see this primarily as a political decision that I think is going to bring the left together. It has a potential of bringing the left together because it comes from different parties within the left. It was proposed by Podemos. So it has that big potential.
Letizia, final point to you. You will no doubt watch Spain very closely this year to see how this policy plays out. What do you think success will look like for both the Spanish government and 500,000 undocumented migrants?
I think the litmus test will have to do with the implementation and the rollout. So what we see a lot is regularization programs that are designed in a way that make it more difficult for people to actually get the permit. I don't think that will be the case here, looking at the conditions. it will be relatively straightforward, even though people, of course, need to submit proof. I hope civil society will be involved in the implementation, including migrant-led communities, because the key thing is informing people of the process. How do you need to apply? What do you need to prove? How much do you need to pay? All of these things. And this will really be proof of how effective this decision is. And then, of course, down the line, looking at, of course, the ability of people to stay regular and contribute to society, because I'm quite sure we will see the economic impact. There has been very clear impacts of the 2005 regularization in Spain, where it has contributed to GDP and also to simply the stability of people's lives and their ability to found families, go to school, develop their skills, and all of these things.
Laetitia, thank you so much. And my thanks also to Pablo and Javier. Superb conversation. Thank you. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.